Retro.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this is it. We've got the last two episodes of Maul Shadow Lord on tap for this episode. Jay, I can't wait to get into this conversation. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
Yes, super excited. We are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right, they're just aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down, and we're now broadcasting to the galaxy. So, no secret, we've talked about this before. Normally, we don't do the podcast before the podcast. When it comes to an episode or something, we just don't talk about it before we record. That being said, we do exchange text messages like, did you see it? What'd you think? It was great. That type of thing. We haven't even done that this week.
We haven't. It's insane.
Right. I don't feel like we need to, because I'm going to assume your reaction was similar to mine over the course of this. But this is huge 2-episode season finale that came out on May the 4th, Star Wars Day. And I know you had a busy week, so you got to it late that first day. Real quick, how many times have you watched it since it came out?
I watched episode 9. Well, very long story short, I watched part of episode 9 probably 5 times, but there was, I think, twice for episode 9 and just once for episode 10. I haven't had a chance to rewatch it yet. So I've seen, bits and snippets online that showcase different parts of the episode, but I haven't sat down and watched the whole thing. And just quick aside, now that my son is home from college, one of the first things I said to him today was, so are you up for binge watching Maul? And he's like, yeah. So
yeah, definitely.
I'm sure I will be doing that again very, very soon. But what about you?
I've watched both of them 3 times.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm really, really into this. And, not to spoil the whole discussion, but I love this 2-episode finale. This was just phenomenal stuff. But now that I've said that, non-spoiler thoughts on your part. What'd you think about these last 2 episodes?
Oh gosh, Dennis, I'm telling you, there were multiple moments where I just kind of sat there going, oh, this show knows exactly what it's doing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just from start to finish, though, this entire series has just been phenomenal. And the finale really nailed it. I mean, it's got those big flashy moments that we're going to be talking about, people are going to be talking about for a long time. But what really worked for me also was how personal and also very uncomfortable it felt at times. And there's so many different elements of this 2-episode finale that just really took it to a different level, but yet stayed so true to the mythos of everything that we know up till now. And there were so many moments where I literally got the chills. So I just, oh gosh, just absolutely gorgeous too. Music, lighting, everything. So these 2 episodes, I cannot wait to break it down. Just, I can't say enough. But what about you?
I love how this series from episode 1 or chapter 1 through chapter 8 has been so incredibly consistent in that the story's been tight. I don't feel like there's really been any wasted beats, any wasted moments. It's developed every single one of the relationships that matter over the course of the series, and that's been fantastic. The pacing's been spot on, the characterization amazing, the action out of this world. One of the things is that for as much as the Acolyte divided audiences, one of the greatest things it had going for it was the saber fights. And I realized that was live action, this is animation. but this has got some of the best saber fights in all of Star Wars. I mean, it just, and especially these last 2 episodes, and I cannot wait to get into some of those discussions there. Just some of the things that they pulled off and the moments that they pulled them off in just left me picking my jaw up off the floor with some of the things they were able to accomplish here. Incredible story. I just cannot state it enough that how impressed I am that they're able to take a collection of characters who we know their fate already and make it matter that they're telling us a story prior to that. When these are characters, they're not Luke, they're not Han, they're not Leia, they're not Darth Vader, but the, Maul, is the big one. And some of his sidekick cronies like Rick Cast and whatever. We ultimately know a lot about them. And there's some new characters thrown in, yeah, sure. But you can't help but find yourself like, I gotta go, wondering, I gotta know what happens next in this series. And it pulled it off. And all I can say that's not a spoiler after this is bring on season 2. I need that now. It's I got to know what happens next because this was just outstanding. Look, it's still early, and ask me again in a couple of months, and maybe I've had some opportunity for it to subside my enthusiasm, and I'm not thinking of it as highly. And you want to call it a hot take right now? That's fantastic. But this is some of the best Star Wars that Disney's put out since they took over. As far as I'm concerned, it just episode per episode, just drawing you in. This has been the most consistent thing, and I already want to watch it again. I got to finish my Mandalorian rewatch. I'm in the middle of season 3 on that before the Mandalorian and Grogu comes out, but this will be the next thing I watch after that because I've seen almost every episode 3 times, all of them at least twice, and I am ready for that 4th viewing. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. And, not to like keep gushing over this before we get into the details, but you mentioned the consistency and also the fact that we know where these characters end up, those like Maul and Dryden Vos, for example. But just the fact that you can see the bridge that they were able to make between Clone Wars Maul, this Maul, Rebels Maul, and even Solo A Star Wars Story Maul is just like mind-blowingly brilliant. So, with that, I just wanted to say that, and I think that's a good place for us to start breaking it down.
Right. So here's my plan, Jay. I'm going to have you read the summary for Chapter 9, Strange Allies, here in just a second. We're going to discuss that a little bit. I think we spend a little bit of time talking about that episode, then get into Chapter 10, and then talk about both these episodes as a whole, because frankly, there's so much that they could have just done this as like a double length episode and just given us 9. It would have made perfect sense. But it's almost too, well, okay, now that we're in full spoiler territory, it's almost too bad that they didn't do this on a weekly basis. Could you imagine the end of episode 9 and then making us wait for a week for episode 10? So, okay, enough of that. Summary for Chapter 9, Strange Allies, please.
Absolutely. Maul takes a holo meeting with Dryden Vos and strikes a deal. Vos will retrieve Maul and his allies from Janix in exchange for Maul removing his boss and placing him in charge of Crimson Dawn. There is one problem, though. They have to get out of the city. To that end, Maul makes a deal with Captain Lawson. If he can get them out of the city, Maul will take them with him. Lawson does just that, but the Inquisitors catch up with them. After a daring fight in which many of Maul's allies perish, they make it into the jungle only to be confronted by Darth Vader.
Yeah, there it is.
Incredible.
So let's skip to the end and come right back because that's what we want to talk about, right?
100%.
So we get a lot of great action scenes. We get the deal with Vos. And then we get that great confrontation with the Inquisitors, flanked by a bunch of stormtroopers, taking on Maul's allies. And then we get to see Icarus go down, Spybot go down, a couple of Mandalorians go down. And then they get, across that acid river. They get out in the jungle, and they get confronted by Darth Vader. I don't know about you, but as soon as I can't remember which one of the Inquisitors it was that said, basically call ahead and let them know that they're coming right. They're heading his way.
Mm-hmm.
That's the moment I knew we were getting Darth Vader in
Mm-hmm.
this. But when did you pick up on it?
Oh, yeah. Right then. Exactly. Yep.
Mhm.
Let's put it this way. I hoped that that payoff was going to happen. I didn't
Mhm.
know, but I kind of suspected it for sure.
Yeah. And I had begun to suspect something like that when we saw the second Star Destroyer in orbit or in the skies above Janix.
Mm, good
Because there
catch.
was one that had come in
Mhm.
earlier, and then the Crow came in on a shuttle, on one of the Inquisitor shuttle, and then there was a second Star Destroyer that we hadn't seen before. It's like, what is that doing there? It can't be just to deliver more stormtroopers and material, because I mean, how many thousands of stormtroopers are on a Star Destroyer? It's, you know, they don't need double for this one city. So that was just whether that is accurate or not, but that was one of the things I was thinking when I saw that that image there. One thing that I found interesting is that Vader shows up and he ignites his lightsaber right after he's already dispatched of Rook Cast. R.I.P. Rook. Kind of hate to see that Vanessa Marshall's involvement in this project is over, but
Yeah.
yeah. But when he does that, the entire screen glows red. I don't know if you caught this, but when they do the recap at the beginning of episode 10, they show that same scene, and when he ignites his lightsaber, it only reflects off of him.
Oh, no, I didn't make that connection.
Watch next time
Oh, I will do
when you're
that.
watching those Colby one. And so I don't know if the one that's in the recap for chapter 10 was taken from an earlier rendering, I should say, of that scene from chapter 9, and then they redid it for the conclusion, or vice versa. But whatever. That's just
Hmm.
I mean, it's not like it's a major deal. It's just some lighting. But anyway, there you go.
Well, the lighting choices have, like I said, have just been amazing throughout the entire series anyway, so
Yeah. All right.
yeah.
Well, we will probably talk a lot more Darth Vader when we get into chapter 10, because that's where he really shines. But
Mhm.
what did you think about Dryden Voss's introduction?
Well, here's the thing with Dryden Vos, I'm thinking about the fact that obviously, again, we know where this ends up in Solo: A Star Wars Story, where Maul is the crime boss, so to speak, or the crime
Hmm.
lord, and Dryden seems to be the worker, or the, I don't want to say underling per se. I mean, he's obviously definitely doing whatever Maul needs him to do, but in this instance, Voss is the leader and Maul is the underling. But I think the idea is that one of the things that I picked up on was that Voss is utilizing Maul as insurance in a lot of ways. So when Maul says that he's gonna assassinate this rival of his, he is putting Maul into a place of power, but in a way that he's still kind of manipulating him. And so I think what ends up happening, and of course I'm speculating this to where we get to Solo: A Star Wars Story, is that Maul realizes that because of everything that happened also later on with Vader and everything, is that he needs to utilize Voss very much like Sidious utilized Dooku, where Voss is the front man and the one that everyone sees, but Maul is behind the scenes being invisible. So I think he kind of took that from him. But in this instance, obviously Voss is the one that is manipulating Maul. So he's not coming there to rescue him. He's coming there to manipulate him. You know what I mean? To use him as his tool, essentially. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I agree with at least part of what you said, with Voss like being a front man for Crimson Dawn, because essentially Maul's criminal empire is a syndicate of syndicates when it comes down to it. You know, we've seen through a number of different sources that he's pulled the Pikes, he's pulled Crimson Dawn, he's pulled Black Sun and other organizations into one group. They're essentially divisions of his criminal empire. And he does make the comment in this episode about how Crimson Dawn betrayed him after his fall on Mandalore. And that's
Mhm.
great. I viewed it more as that Dryden Voss was making a deal with Maul, which is, we both have something the other one wants. You've got the power to put me in the position I want, and I have an opportunity to get you off the planet. You don't have a ship right now. I can do that. And so at the moment, I think they're kind of equals in the situation. I think Maul is going to assert a position of superiority, because if it was truly Dryden Vos just manipulating Maul, then why does Maul end up being in charge? Because at the end of, you think of Soul Star Wars story, Kira reports to Maul that Dryden is dead. And then his response is like, oh, we're going to be working very close together, because he then essentially elevates her to that position. So in a way, he's the kingmaker, so to speak, in that regard.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, he is.
Yeah. So one of the other things that happens here is that, so Maul makes that deal. And if you had any misconception, then he was a good guy. The fact that he's making a deal to kill someone and elevate another person into a crime lord's position, that should start to dispel that idea for you if it hadn't already. But the thing is that they got to get out of the city, and they don't know how to do it. But Maul believes that Lawson might know how. So to get in touch with Lawson, he basically sends some sort of a vision to Devon while she's sleeping.
Yeah.
That's new. I mean, the only one that I can think of that might have done something like that is Sidious previously, with like manipulating Anakin. And that's not entirely clear what happened. That's what happened there, but you could speculate that maybe it did. And this also creates an issue where later Daki's like, in order for that to have happened, you guys have had to form some sort of a connection. So what happened? And then her response is, well, he saved our lives. And so, but I'm asking you a couple different things here. What did you make of all that?
Well, for me, it opens up the idea of how deep does Maul's force powers go? Because we've seen people like Kylo Ren, for example, being able to get into another person's head for interrogation and that type of thing. But a lot of times the force suggestion needs to be either when the person is present, or, as we've seen before, they say, oh, force tricks only work on the weak-minded. Well, Devon definitely wasn't weak-minded. But, and again, with Daki saying that they must have formed some kind of a connection, I think that for Devon, we talked about this before too, is that she has, I don't necessarily want to say empathy for Maul, but there's definitely something about him that she's kind of enamored with and fascinated by. And whether that be the lure to power or whatever. So she's opening up that mental pathway. And so when is she most vulnerable? When she's sleeping, of course, because she's not consciously really controlling her thoughts. Maul, I don't think, knew that she was actually sleeping. Maybe it was kind of a, a lucky strike kind of thing. But yeah, it kind of pulls that into question. Is this an ability? Is it a connection? And I don't want to go so far as to say a dyad, like Kylo Ren and Rey in any way, shape, or form. But there's definitely something there. And for Daki to recognize that, I mean, obviously this is something that has been recognized or at least established before. But what were your thoughts?
I was going to say, because one of the things that this series has done is it has put an emphasis on the connections between Force users, right? Because when Daki was off with Lawson and they got separated from Devon and Rylee, at one point, and I'm paraphrasing, Daki makes a connection that my connection with my Padawan will reunite us. And then he did sense her coming back. And so that's something that I'm not saying it's been completely absent in all of canon Star Wars, but it has not been emphasized the way it has been in this series. And so Daki's recognizing that a similar connection is forming with Maul, which has got to be kind of alarming in this situation here. And I'm going to chalk it up that Maul was able to send that vision because probably had an idea that Devon might be given on the time of day. It was like the middle of the night. So why not send that vision there? And it just happened that he was accurate. We never see Maul sleep, but okay. But at any rate, but again, this idea that, okay, you have to be close to someone to form a connection is what it seems to be, not an attachment. I know you and I spend a lot of time talking about attachment versus connection here, but I think Daki's right. It's like, this is not just something that can, and I'm glad they're making this distinction. It's not just like any two Force users can start doing this, telepathy between each other, right? That it just there has to be some sort of a connection that makes these things possible. The other thing that we see an awful lot of, and especially these last 2 episodes, is that how many times do we see Devon or Donkey like that grimace right before the Inquisitor shows up, or
Oh, yeah.
when Vader shows up in this situation? So this is something we've long suspected. It was a bigger deal in Legends, kind of got shunted off to the side in the current continuity, that, but but not so much really. I mean, like, a lot of people are able to sense like the wrongness of Vader when he shows up, but they've been able to do it with like even the Inquisitors sometimes, that and it may be that they're specifically identifying an Inquisitor, but they're identifying like a danger showing up, which does seem to be a bit of a Jedi trait. That's a bit of a diversion, but yeah, I kind of like this idea, because there's a number of moments over the course of these last 2 episodes where you can see, I don't want to call it a divided loyalty for Devon, but you can see that this connection she's making with Maul just continues to grow and grow. And it's done so over the series. When they were on the train and they were fighting Marak, when Rylee was encouraging her to leave, she charged into battle with Maul to take on Marak, and even then, like, charged ahead of Maul to
Mm-hmm.
take on Marak. And so we now have these other instances. It's been subtle, but it really pays off so well in these last 2 episodes.
Oh, I agree. And this honestly isn't a new idea. If you think all the way back even to A New Hope, when Vader's standing there with all the Moffs and he says, feel a presence. It's a presence I've not felt since, and he realizes at that point that it's Obi-Wan. So it's something that connection never truly goes away. And between Force users, I think it's just amplified if those people had some sort of a connection with each other. So this, I think, is just building off of that genesis all the way back in A New Hope too.
Mhm, mhm. What did you think of the respect Maul showed for Daki at this point? Because at one point, Rook says something along the lines of like, "What do we do with the old man?" Because she knows that Devon is the goal here for Maul. And then Maul's response is, "Have some respect, Rook. He is a Jedi Master, and we need him for now." But him just showing, but he said it with respect. It was not dismissive at all.
I don't know. I kind of heard a little bit of jest in his voice. I would have to go back and watch it again, but I think that there's definitely some respect there because obviously Daki is very formidable. I mean, he's heck of a fighter and he held his own even against Vader, which is something that a lot of Jedi and other fighters can not say that they've been able to do. But I kind of wonder if it was just Maul being a little bit kind of like, "Oh, yeah, well, he is a Jedi Master, and we need him for now," kind of
Yeah.
thing? So, I don't know. I don't I kind of caught a little jest in his voice, but maybe not. Maybe it was complete respect.
Yeah, I'm just going back to the comments we got prior to the season launching, and I can't remember if it was Sam Witwer or Dave Filoni that said it, that, Maul is sitting here and he's not impressed with the Empire because they don't have any principles. And it's not that he
Mhm.
loved the Jedi, but that at least they had principles in that
Mhm.
regard.
Good point.
And I think he legitimately respects Daki's abilities. Because even in, jumping ahead to the next episode, there's a couple times where, you know, he's been injured while fighting Vader and he's like got his hand on Daki's back because they're trying to make their way.
Yeah.
And he's honestly debating with Daki about how it is to fight Vader. Maul's opinion is we've got to be aggressive. That is someone who knows how to fight Jedi. So you can't fight like a Jedi. And Daki's response is like, we have to defend each other. And in doing so, we'll beat Vader. And so I feel like there was some genuine respect there. I bring this all up simply because one of the themes that we've been talking about over this past 5 weeks while I've been talking about this series is that Maul is not simply the attack dog that we met in the Phantom Menace.
Mhm.
He's someone who he's intelligent. And I'm even thinking about some of the comics we read, when he was he wanted to fight a Jedi. And so there was that one Padawan he rescued and and then ended up slaying later and stuff like that. Even then, it's like, he was not unintelligent there and he was not as savage, but he's evolved like leaps and bounds since then. And this is just like, I think, another facet of his personality where when he was Sidious's apprentice, the whole idea was to bring the Jedi Order down and the Sith will take over the galaxy. And it's not that he loves the Jedi now, but he recognizes them for what they are, which is, potent Force users.
hmm And I've always said how wicked smart, I like to use that term, that
Mhm.
Maul is. And so, yeah, I would definitely concur with that, that he can see beyond it. And I do think that he respects Daki in a way that, like you said, when you brought that up, at least he has principles.
Right.
And so, because Maul is kind of lost right now, and really, Daki kind of represents what the Jedi should have been after Order 66, because he also recognizes that, I don't know if you want to say like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so keep your friends close, your enemies closer kind of thing with Maul, to borrow a couple of phrases. But in the end, I do think that he also respects Daki, also respects Maul's abilities as well.
Yeah. Daki just knows to keep him at arm's length, right? Because
Oh
just going
yeah.
back to scenes from earlier in the series when he tells Devon, it's like, I hear your voice, but it's Maul's words I'm
hmm
hearing. And I really feel like and yes, we're spilling into the next episode. I think that there's part of Daki that's trying to get through to Maul in this instance, which and it's a hope beyond hope. Need Alan Voivod back for discuss that part.
Yeah,
But
there you go.
the uh but the notion is that they're up against a common enemy, which is Darth Vader. And yeah, he does not really trust Maul, but part of him I think wants to, even though he knows better. And
hmm
for so long during that fight, they do work together well. And we'll get to that last bit
They
when we get
do.
to it here in a bit. But okay, well, a couple last things I want to touch on before we get into the next episode and then talk about everything as a whole. Two other things that kind of impressed me. One, in that confrontation underneath the power plant at that fissure, when we got that toxic river, which is just acidic. The stormtroopers are there, the Inquisitors are there. Some of the Icarus ends up getting killed. He sacrifices himself after he's taken a few blows by taking a bunch of stormtroopers into the acid. I mean,
hmm
how hardcore can you get? We see some Mandalorians perish there as well. And Maul sends everyone else ahead of him across the river, starting with the Lawsons and Looti, and then it's Rook and the other Mandalorian, and then the Jedi do that acrobatic thing with they jump onto the skiff, and then from there they leapfrog over to the other side of the river before he finally gets across. So, what does that say about Maul?
Well, part of me wonders if it's because he wanted to be able to dispatch them himself.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we were talking about in some of the earlier episodes, is that these represent what he could have been and what he could have become. But I think also part of it was just a strategic move, because if he would have went over there first, then the rest of his team would have died. There's no way that they would have made it over. And he needs them still. So,
Yeah,
I think it's more strategic in that way, but yet he also wanted to be able to sick it to the Inquisitors too. But what do you
right.
think?
I think there's truth to everything you just said. I also think there is. It kind of gets back to our Darth Bane conversation that we just had when Bane was pondering on attachment and how that didn't do him any good when it came to allies. I think Maul is also that pragmatic, which is he likes Rook. Rook is useful. The Lawsons have proven to be useful. They could be useful again, especially if there's something else they need to figure out after this. The Mandalorians have been, these Mandalorians at least, the others that ran off and abandoned him, not so much. But these are all people who are assets, and there may be some affection to them. There is no reason to dispose of them now because they could be useful, even if he does like them a little bit. Compared to like Vader, who's like, there's no one he won't sacrifice at a moment's notice just because they even annoy him. And Vader
Mhm.
believes he can do everything himself. He doesn't need any assistance with everything. Maul is, like I said, a little bit more pragmatic when it comes to his philosophy about things. And you're right. I think it is just if anyone's gonna be able to hold off these Inquisitors in order for everyone to get away, it's him.
Right.
And it's not that he needs to save them for their sake. As you suggested, he needs to save them for his own sake. And Doc even makes mention of that earlier in the episode, which is when they're in that tunnel and Devon's talking about how Maul helped them avoid the Inquisitor, and Daki says, well, why did he do that? Did he do that for your sake or for his own?
Right. Exactly.
And I think this is one of the payoffs of that speculation.
Oh, 100%.
Mm-hmm. But we lost Spybot in this episode.
I know. Poor little guy.
That saber goes through him, that little plea, master, or as he falls off into the acid. This is like not exactly a good guy, but he was kind of like the Maul's dog in a way, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So
And here's the thing, we were talking about how Maul is defined by his trauma, and he's losing everyone. He's already lost his other brother in the previous episode, and then he loses Icarus here. Now he's losing Spybot. It's just one after another after another.
yeah. So getting back to the whole Vader reveal there, Rook and the sole remaining Mandalorian, other than her, go off to investigate. He doesn't make it back out. Rook comes running out. It's like, there's something out there. And the next thing you know, you see her get pulled back into the Force by the Force. You see her clawing at the ground, trying to get away. I don't know if you caught the comment, but apparently Vanessa Marshall played that role in that moment like Vader was ripping her lungs out through her throat.
That is intense, Vanessa. That is
Yeah.
intense. And let me tell you, that imagery, now that I've seen this quote, just puts that in a whole different perspective. I mean, it was terrifying anyway, but wow.
And here's the other thing I love. When Vader came out of the trees, I was thinking back to the cover of the original Legends novel, Splinter of a Mind's Eye, by Alan Dean Foster, which was intended to be a sequel to A New Hope if there was going to be funding with getting The Empire Strikes Back made, whatever. It was designed to be a cheap sequel, then ended up just being a novel that, for the longest time, was supposed to take place between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, and then, of course, got relegated into Legends before there was even Legends. And it's set on a jungle-type planet with Vader coming out of the trees. And this time, it's on the book cover, it's confronting Luke and Leia. But then they confirmed that on StarWars.com. So I was so pleased to see that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. The other thing that it reminded me a bit of was the Stranger's first appearance in The Acolyte, coming out of the forest and igniting a saber. And then, like, the next episode it picks up, it's Vader fighting them and then using a massive force push to push them all back, just like Kyner did.
Mm-hmm. I didn't make that connection either.
So
nice catch.
All right. Well, we went way longer than I intended with that plan I just laid out about 25 minutes ago. So
I'll tell you one thing I have to say about Vader's entrance, and you had put this in our notes about the whole, Dave Filoni and Brad Rao talking about bringing him into, this scene, is that, when you see Rakas being pulled out, it's all horror slasher movie, right?
Yeah.
So when you hear that breathing, that's when you get the chills, right? That's when oh boy, this is it. This is going to be the thing that we've been waiting for ever since the Phantom Menace, right? And because it's just, it's such a slasher movie entrance that it's not even Star Wars at that point. I mean, it is, but it's not. You know what I mean? It's just, it's just chilling. Because Vader isn't just an enemy at this point; he's an entity, and it's
very much so.
It's so cool, so cool. So sorry, had to say that.
That's okay. That's okay. Get in. Go ahead and give us the summary for Chapter 10, and then we will dive into the second half of this conversation.
All right. So with that, Maul and his allies fight for their lives against Darth Vader, the Inquisitors, and the Empire among the ancient ruins outside of Janix. Time is precious as Dryden Vos and his ship draw near. During the battle, Maul and the Jedi are separated from the Lawsons and take on Vader and the Inquisitors, while the Lawsons look for the ship. Lawson ultimately sacrifices himself so that Rylee and Two Boots can get to Dryden's ship. When Devon gets further separated from Daki and Maul, Maul betrays and abandons Daki, who is then slain by Vader. She gives in to her rage, but before she can pursue Vader, Maul holds her back and vows to train her so that they can have their revenge.
Yes, and I neglected to put in that the she is Devon, but she's also the only she left in this case. So,
yes.
Anyway, moving on. A couple things that are interesting here that I want to get out of the way so we can get into some of the deeper conversations. Nobody knows who Vader is in this
Yeah.
scene. Maul is like, he says, what are you? You're no Inquisitor. And it's not a put down. It's like, it's not like Darth Vader saying to Luke Skywalker, the Force is with you, young Skywalker, but you're no Jedi yet. This is what are you? You're no Inquisitor. Who are you with all this power? Is what Maul is essentially saying in this situation. And two, Vader never says a word in these 2 episodes. All he does is breathe in this kid. And I think, and as they put it on StarWars.com, is that he doesn't need to, because everyone's beneath him here. And unlike when he's fighting Luke, he doesn't want anything out of them except for to kill them in this situation.
Right. And so I think it's key that when Maul says, "What are you?" he doesn't say, "Who are you?" He immediately understands the danger and that this terrifies him. You can tell that Maul's swagger just completely subsides in that moment. And he really is, I think this is one of the first times that I've seen Maul truly being afraid. We've seen other instances of him being shaken by different things that have happened. But yeah, and the whole idea that Vader didn't need to speak is so true. I mean, I totally agree that if he would have spoken and started monologuing, and that type of thing, that it definitely would have taken away from the impact and the sheer presence of him in this moment. And just the fact that, Vader is what Maul really should have been. You know what I mean? Like we were saying before, that the Inquisitors could have been what he could have been, but this is not. And what's crazy to me too, okay, I'm rambling, but we know that Anakin caught a glimpse of Maul back in the Phantom Menace. So he knows, and he knows who he is. He knows what happened. And really, Vader is kind of Maul's legacy in a way. This would not have happened if Maul wouldn't have shown up and killed Qui-Gon and then sent this whole thing into motion. So you talk about like the butterfly effect kind of thing. This is case in point.
Yeah. A couple thoughts on that. I don't think Vader particularly cares at this point about who Maul is. I think he only wants to destroy Maul because, one, the Emperor wants Maul destroyed, and two, Maul just reminds him of an old life. It's not about revenge on Maul for Vader. It's just the same reason he wants to destroy Obi-Wan, the same reason he wants to destroy Ahsoka, and everybody else, is that anyone who reminds Vader of Anakin, that needs to go. Because as Vader points out, you didn't kill Anakin Skywalker, I did in this situation. And he just wants to get rid of all those reminders. Two, Daki puts voice to what Maul suspects, which is, because the quote is something like that, that his instincts are that this is a Sith Lord. And, Maul is essentially, as you were alluding to, Maul is looking at his replacement. He has no idea who Vader is in this situation, but he also knows that he's no match for Maul. And when you talk about Maul being afraid, that also gives him the opportunity to demonstrate bravery. He doesn't actually ever run he does say run the one time, but he's almost always one of the first people to engage Vader. And it's only at the end when he suffered that injury and it's catching up to him, and he sees the opportunity to sacrifice Daki to turn Devon, that he does those type of things in this situation. I'm not sure I put any of that artfully, but the point is that there's a bunch that comes out with this fight between Vader and Maul. One, it is oh my gosh, Dooku's gone. This is the next Sith Lord. Two, I think Maul gets it, which is the whole point of the Sith is that they're supposed to get more and more powerful. And when flashing back to the Clone Wars, when Sidious says you're no longer my apprentice, you've been replaced. Maul was offended when it was Dooku, but I think he's looking at Vader and it's like, oh my gosh, I mean, this is the guy that came after me now. Kind of hard to blame Sidious, I suppose, even though he's not forgiving Sidious, obviously. And this last bit, it is the whole goal that Maul's had all along, which is Devon. He's going to take Devon and fashion her into a weapon, which he's definitely going to need if he's going to stand any chance against Vader and Sidious.
Oh, for sure. And, I think in this moment too, Maul realizes that he's basically been rendered obsolete, that
Mhm.
there is nothing more powerful than this thing standing in front of him, this what are you standing in front of him. And so I think that is kind of an aha moment for him as well.
Mhm.
As you said, he's kind of almost the life flashing before your eyes sort of thing where he's thinking, okay, I gotta do what I need to do. I need Devon. I need to get out of here. And that's what makes the ball start rolling too for, like I said, eventually him being in the background instead of being in the foreground with the crime syndicate with Crimson Dawn. So he can then be the puppet master. So I think he realizes at this point, like all of this is maybe going through his head. Maybe not specifically, but he's getting those feelings perhaps.
Yeah. One of the scenes that we didn't talk about in the last episode, that I want to bring up in the context of this episode is while they're fighting there by what they kind of refer to as the river Styx, on stars.com, Maul is fighting the Inquisitors and he says to Marok, you're a pawn and he
Mhm.
dispatched you to die just like he did me in this situation. And I think it's just it's interesting because, we got that there. One, what did you make of Maul trying to reason with Marok in that moment? Was he really trying to reason with him or what was going on there? Two, I, I feel like that moment says something about episode 10, the finale here, while Maul's fighting Vader, which is, you know, if the Inquisitors are disposable, then what is Vader in this situation? Does that make sense, that question at
Mhm.
all?
Mhm. No, yeah, absolutely. And so I think this goes back to when Maul was saying in one of the previous episodes, referring to Sidious, that he was not going to let him do what he did to Maul to anyone else. And so I think that that's maybe his last ditch effort to almost, like you said, reason with the Inquisitors and to try to shake their tree a little bit and say, "Don't you realize what is happening here? Do you not see what your ultimate, destiny is going to be if you continue on this path?" But as we know, the Inquisitors are also a very broken bunch of Jedi that have been warped and remade essentially into these assassins. So I don't know if there is a way to reason with them, you know? So, yeah, but I think for Vader, he realizes, like I said, at that point that he's an entity, not an enemy, and that there's
Yeah.
nothing he can do against him.
Yeah, I think, in one sense, it's just that, when Maul's fighting Marok and he says that, it's got to be insane to him that other people don't see what he sees now,
Mhm.
because we can now retcon everything we know about Maul when he's struck down by Obi-Wan and he falls into the pit. There's part of him that's got to be thinking, how did it come to this? Right. I've been so, Sidious is telling him earlier in the Phantom Menace, you're well trained, take out the Jedi first. And then, the Queen will be easy to get, to do what you need to do. Maul believed, and to a certain extent, he was right, that the Jedi weren't going to be a match. He was taking on a master and an apprentice. He defeated the master, and the apprentice pulled a trick to get him. And then later, he's completely abandoned by the master. And so, yet now he's seeing even a lesser version. The Inquisitors are not Sith. Maul was a Sith, and so it's just, again, that's just kind of got to be insane to him that he's seeing these people that are falling for Sidious's plan again. I don't know that he really cared about Moran. Probably would have loved to have him as an ally. I mean, why not when
Mhm.
it comes
Yeah,
down to it?
sure.
But
Mhm.
I think you're also right that Vader's just something completely different. It's this is the, in a way, and I don't think Maul gets the big picture here. In a way, Vader is like the promise. All that power that he's sensing coming off of Vader, how the Jedi are so like instantly repulsed by him. The Jedi don't sense Maul so much the way that they incense the Inquisitors, that they sensed Vader in this series. Not at all. And there's danger that comes off the Inquisitors. There's danger that comes off of Vader, not the same way it comes off of Maul. over the
Mhm.
course of this series here.
Mhm.
And so he looks, and I'm rambling now, when, he sees Vader, there's a big difference with everything that's been going on. It goes back to that line. It's like, you're no Inquisitor, you're something else in this
Right.
situation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, there's a lot to be said for Maul not really giving off the same kind of Force vibe, if you will, as the Inquisitors and, other Force users. And I just can't help but to think all the way back to the Phantom Menace when he was waiting for the security locks on Naboo, to open up, and
Mhm.
he was prowling like a
Yeah.
cat, And so I think that that's a lot of what his whole, MO is that he lurks and he bides his time. And I mean, that's why he's called Shadow Lord. And isn't it interesting that Daki refers to him as this Shadow Lord?
Hmm.
I think that was the one and only time that he truly addressed Maul or referred to him in that way. Kind of quick
That was
aside.
the only reference to him that went in the entire series that way.
That's okay. That's what I
Yeah.
thought because I was like, "Whoa, that's kind of a squirrel, moment sort of thing."
Yeah. When they
But,
put the title of the
once
show in the dialogue. Right.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So, but again, I think that that's also maybe Maul's intention. And
Mhm.
again, that serves him well when he does become the front man behind the scenes to Crimson Dawn.
Right. No, I think Daki, we look at Shadow Lord being, just as you described it, as the guy that's in behind all these criminal syndicates that are Maul's secret empire. I think Daki also meant it in a second sense, which is this: he's been cautioning Devon this entire time. You know, I hear your voice, but it's Maul's words. And that I think that speaks to this fact that Maul is pulling strings and he's pulling ours. Daki, I think, recognizes that Maul is trying to influence him. I mean, it's not even a secret. Maul is trying to reason with Daki. It's like, we've got to be aggressive. We got to throw everything we got at Vader. And Daki's response is like, no, we got to defend each other. That's how we're going to beat him. And then, you know, Daki's then cautioning Devon, don't give in to your anger. Don't give in to your emotions. We're going to beat him by sticking up for each other. And so he's talking about the Shadow Lord. It is this idea that Maul is subtly pulling strings. He's picking away, and it works ultimately in this episode. We'll see it here in just a second. That
Mhm.
to get Devon to where he needs her to be receptive to his teaching, and I think that's really what he's meant by the Shadow Lord thing.
Mhm.
Comment right
Mhm.
there. Let's come back to Maul in a second. I want to talk about a couple of the other things that's going on here. So Lawson, Rylee, and Looti and Two Boots, are their own little entity, and they're looking for Dryden Vos's ship. And they come across the Imperial shuttle, and so they have the whole thing where Luti's going to go distract. I don't want to shortchange all these characters, but to me, the bigger story is what's going on with Maul, Vader, Devon, and Daki across these
Oh,
two
sure.
episodes.
Mhm.
But we get the whole scene here where they got to take out the stormtroopers and get rid of the shuttle, and it ultimately ends up with Lawson sacrificing himself so that Rylee can get to the Dryden Vos's ship with Two Boots there. What stood out to you of this sequence here? Multiple sequences and their plight and their escape.
Well, honestly, I did not see Brander Lawson going down here.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of surprises. I didn't see Rook Cass going down. I didn't see Lawson going down. It was kind of like a really bad, deja vu of Rogue One in a lot of ways, losing all of these characters in this finale. But I mean, obviously, Lawson did it because he wanted to sacrifice himself so that his son would have a chance to survive and for no other reason. And so it kind of upset me that I don't want to say that he gave up so easily, but he definitely put himself on the front line so that they would have a chance.
Yeah.
And it really saddened me. It got
Did
me.
you realize you didn't actually see him die?
Good point.
Because he wanders off into the fog as the stormtroopers are shooting at him, and he's hobbling and he's taking a couple hits, but we don't actually see him die in
Hmm.
this episode.
Yeah. And stormtroopers tend to miss. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, look, it's the I'm just putting it out there. It's like I think the better course of action for the storytelling, unless they've just thought of something that I haven't right now, is for Brander Lawson to have sacrificed himself for his son Rylee. That's huge. It's noble and fantastic storytelling. But I mean, unlike Icarus, who we saw dissolve in the acid, Spybot dissolve in the acid,
Right.
Rook Cass, we hear the crunch of her throat getting destroyed, and the Mandalorians who get shot dead in the previous episode. In this one, the point is we just don't actually we see Brander hobbling off towards the stormtroopers. We hear the blaster bolts, we see some strikes, but we don't actually see him perish. That's all just to say, don't be totally surprised if they try and pull a twist on us next season with him coming back at some point. But
I hope so. And I hope that Rena Sol comes back too, because we didn't see Rena Sol die for sure. And we were talking about that last time or last episodes, that if you look really closely, that you see this person rolling off to the left side of the screen behind perhaps some barriers. So who knows? Maybe they'll meet up and go after everybody. That would be
how
awesome.
cool would it be if Rena leads the rescue effort for Brander?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That would be fantastic.
All right. Well, if that happens, you heard it here first. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah. Here on Podcast Stardust. So back to, and we got about a little less than 10 minutes left to wrap up this episode. So back to the finale here. We got Daki and Maul fighting Vader. Maul has, I think, had it. His hip is still injured. One of the Inquisitors got him there. Vader struck him even more violently there, and he's been hobbling through the battle, holding his own for the most part. And then he basically backs off away from Vader and Daki, and then force pushes Daki into Vader, which essentially unbalances Daki, and then he gets into a compromising position. And the next time we see him, Daki has been run through by Vader's lightsaber. Devon sees that, screams no, and loses it. And that is where she gives into her emotion. Basically, Maul has to hold her back. She says, "No, I will kill them." And she tries to go rushing off. And that's when he grabs her by the arm. And, there's another, she has an encounter with Vader, and she's been fighting the Crow this entire time. And Maul makes the promise. It's like, you're not ready for this. I will train you. We will have our revenge. The thing is that I can't say that this end is all that surprising. It's more surprising to me that Daki made it all the way to the final episode of the season. I thought he was going to be gone earlier in the series, but this is what it was going to take in order to get Devon to cross over. For as much like humanity, for lack of a better description, and for empathy, whatever we wanted to ascribe to Maul, we see it was all part of a larger plan to get her to ultimately fall. And I don't know that I can say like she's on the dark side now, but she's receptive to it. She's opened herself to using the emotion. The last moment we see her in this, she's like, she's lost her lightsaber. She was using one of Maul's to fight the Inquisitor and to fight Vader. And it's not unlike what we got to see again, to bring up the Acolyte again, when Osha bleeds the crystal right there. And it's a very similar type scene in that regard, but it was just done like 10 times better here. And so I don't know, I babbled. What did you think about that conversion for her?
Well, there's a lot here to unpack. So first of all, I just want to give some mad props to Daki for holding his own against Vader for as long as he did. He was really impressive with, the flips and his saber technique and just his patience and everything like that. And it wasn't until he got that little hit on Vader's shoulder, because Vader was, even though Daki was really showing his skills as a blade master, honestly, Vader was kind of acting like, okay, this is fun, but it's kind of boring, and I'm gonna do this one-handed. But as soon as Daki lands that blow, Vader's like, all right, I'm done. That's it.
Yep.
I'm just gonna unleash. And then he starts raining those haymakers down on Daki. And it reminded me of Luke, what Luke did to Vader.
The words right out of my mouth. Yes.
Well, of course, because we always think alike. But it was just, I think for Vader, it reminded him, if you want to go with the Anakin thing that we were talking about earlier, everything that he was and he stood for, and pain is his anger response. Anakin's is
Mhm.
/ Vader. And so we see that, and he'd had enough. So once Jackie ends up dying and Devon sees this, we've talked so much before about the hero's journey, and I do think that this really does illustrate Devon's journey this entire season. It's been very subtle, but little things along the way that we've seen from her in terms of the classic steps in the hero's journey. And then in this episode specifically, she does things like throws down her cape, she grabs that red lightsaber, like you said. And then ultimately, she's crossing the threshold at this
Mhm.
point. So her old self is kind of dying, and I don't know specifically. I'm not going to pretend to know every step and every nuance of the hero's journey, just like broad strokes that I understand. But she's going through this ordeal and the abyss. And so finally, when she says, I'm ready, that's her crossing the threshold and embracing her new mentor.
Yeah.
So I think, for Devon, it's been and we knew it was going to happen. I mean, I shouldn't say we knew, but we were kind of thinking that all along that it was going to lead to this, but we just didn't know how. So that was kind of the payoff.
Yeah. Yeah, the only 2 outcomes I saw for Devon at the end of the series is, 1, she became Maul's apprentice, or 2, she died.
Hmm.
One of those 2 things. It would have been extremely surprising if she'd survived and wandered off a Taki, or not fallen, not becoming his had not become his apprentice. So, yeah, I'm with you. We knew this. I feel like we knew where this was going. It just was done so well that forgive's the wrong word, but it's just like, oh, okay, this story ended up where I want, but I love the journey that we watched to get there.
Hmm.
Love not I didn't love seeing people die, yada yada yada. You know what I'm saying? It's the
It was engaging. It was
yeah,
intriguing the entire time.
the
It
story
was
was
just good
fantastic.
storytelling. I mean,
Yeah,
let's face it.
we are in agreement. One other thing I forgot to ask you that happens before this is that we had earlier in the series Devon asking Maul about his master, and then Maul pointed out that his master betrayed him and killed his brother, but that's not the worst thing he did to him. And it's finally in this episode that, while they're on the run from Vader, Maul tells her that, my master destroyed the Jedi and made himself emperor. The fact that Palpatine is Sidious is a secret. Nobody knows that in the galaxy, beyond a select few.
Hmm.
That that Palpatine was a Sith Lord, because the whole thing was staged that the Jedi showed up and tried to kill him, but then there was an intervention. It's not that Palpatine defeated the Jedi. I can't remember what the official story is, but the fact that he's a Sith Lord is a secret. The fact that Vader is a Sith Lord is not. Eventually, no one knows. Vader's not widely known at this point, but here Maul is. And did you catch Devon's reaction? It's like she's almost too angry to process it at the time here.
Hmm.
But I felt like that should have been like a real slap in the face in that moment.
Yeah, you would think, but when you're that emotional, a lot of times those kinds of details just slip.
Mhm.
And that goes back to, what I was saying before about, Maul knew who Palpatine / Sidious really was. And yet he kept that information to himself, truly. He could have really done some major public damage with that information, but he chose not to.
Well, who's going to believe him is the thing. I think it's
Mm,
and the other thing is that Maul's a fugitive. He's got Inquisitors. He's got Vader after him. Him just going out and spreading this information. Maybe there's a way to do it where you plant rumors and seeds in certain places, but just him coming out and saying it, it's just
mhm.
what's to be gained from that.
Yeah.
And he makes himself even more of a target if he starts doing that stuff. So,
Well, yeah, and I do think that he thoroughly was afraid of Sidious because
mhm,
of everything that he's been through.
yep.
And just the fact that he showed up in the Clone Wars the way he did and took out Savage and then did what he did to Maul.
Which
So,
has
there's
resulted in this long game that he's playing to try and
exactly.
defeat Sidious. Ultimately not going to
Mhm.
work, but it'll be fun to see how we get from here to Rebels. So
Right.
okay, we are out of time. Is there any last second thing you want to say before we wrap this up?
Oh gosh, I just appreciate everything that this season has done for us in terms of the storytelling, and like I said, just the bridge that it gives us between Clone Wars Maul and even Phantom Menace Maul, all the way through his entire lineage. And I even got to thinking about it today that when we see Maul with his cane, if these injuries that he sustained in this part of the series is the reason for that. You know what I mean? So it's just these little moments that start to connect these puzzle pieces together. And I'm so stoked for season 2, and it cannot come soon enough. So that's my last thoughts.
Yeah, neither can I. I just cannot wait for that. The last thing I'll just point out is I think the final scene was spot on. You know, you've got Devon and Rylee in the back of Dryden Vos's ship. They're both mourning. I think Maul Shadowlord is the first time we've seen tears in animation, because we got to see Maul do it a couple episodes ago, and then we got to see Devon shed some tears, and Rylee even shed a few in this one. But she's just rolling Maul's saber back and forth in her hand like she's contemplating this, you know, and then Maul sits down and then she says, "All right, I'm ready." And you just kind of get that smug look on Maul's face, like, yep, it worked.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll be talking about Maul some more in the next couple of weeks as we get more into the aftermath and the reaction to all of this. And I'm sure there'll be more stories that come out on StarWars.com. They'll give us some opportunities to talk about things. So stick with us for that. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of season 1 of Maul Shadowlord. We can't wait for season 2, as Jay was just saying. And we hope you'll be with us as we discuss it, whenever that is, probably sometime in 2027. And you can do that by subscribing to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. We would love your ratings and reviews as well. I was just noticing for the first time that we've got comments on Spotify, so I'm going to start looking for those. So thank you to everyone who's reached out for us over there. I apologize I have not gotten back to you, or we've not gotten back to you. I just wasn't aware that was even such a thing. I know you could do ratings over there. I didn't know you could do comments. So I'm going to start looking for some of those, and hopefully we can catch up with you and discuss some of that stuff. I also like to invite you to check out the show over on retrozap.com. We are part of the RetroZap Podcast Network, as well as a bunch of other great shows. Right now you can find Enjoy Stuff. They did a really fun Rogue One retrospective for May the 4th. I got to do a little bit on that. That was a lot of fun. And then Jay and Josh have a couple of shows that they're doing over there as well. And Jay, you want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found online?
Yeah, so this is actually the easiest way to get in touch with us, through Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. So you can DM us, and you can also email us at podcaststardust@gmail.com. So we're still learning, obviously, of all of these different ways to connect. I mean, the World Wide Web really is wide.
Yeah.
But we also have some Pinterest boards, and then also our YouTube and YouTube music outlets as well, which you can interact with us there. And we will definitely see those comments and reactions as well. And if you want to purchase some Podcast Stardust merch, we do have a TeePublic store, and the link to that is in our show notes. And you can pick up one of 7 different show logo designs. And we'll just say thanks in advance if you do that, because every one of those purchases does help to support the show.
Oh, right. You want to remind everybody what you got going on in cosplay?
Yeah, so as usual, you can catch me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I just did a really fun little outing at the Art on the Alley festival, if you will, in New Philadelphia, Ohio. So I'm going to be trickling out some material there. Got some fun little reels and some pictures and whatnot there too. So once again, that's at j.snipscosplay. And you can also check out my other cosplays as well, from Hera, the Fourth Sister, Inquisitor, and my original concept Mandalorian, as well as some other non-Star Wars things.
Okay, upcoming on the show on Monday, we're going to be getting into some recent Star Wars news, and we got some things to say about the Star Wars Celebration ticket sales, so make sure you join us for that. And then on Wednesday, Jay is bringing us the May edition of World Between Worlds, where she rounds up Star Wars lifestyle and fashion products. So, thanks for listening to episode 1031 of Podcast Stars, everyone. Have a great weekend, and until next time, may the Force be with you.